Get Bill Bender from the Sporting News covering college football with us in here. Bill, how are you this morning? Bill, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
All right, Bill, it's very fitting. It is the 1st of July, and I'm ready for some hot takes. So, a guy that, you're typically kind of in the middle, a little Switzerland-y. I have some hard questions for you right out of the gates.
Okay.
All right, you ready? If you're going to operate in the unknown of a first-year starter in a program, you pushing your chips towards Moore up there in Eugene or Sand winning the job in Columbus?
Probably the guy in Columbus because he gets to throw to Jeremiah and Carnell Tate. Um,
Fair.
I think that's the easiest.
Rather than hand it off to McHale?
I mean, that's pretty good too. And you're in an offense with Dan Lanning where the last two transfer quarterbacks played very well. So track record's there. But I just think Ohio State, Sayan played well in the spring game. Lincoln Keenholtz improved. I don't know that he'll win the starting job. And then you have the thing with Julian Sayin, though, is he's going to have to look over his shoulder at Tavion St. Clair, a five-star freshman. You guys know that everybody loves that five-star freshman and can't wait to see him on the field. That's just how this game works. So, but I would go with the Ohio State quarterback because I get to throw to Jeremiah, and that's, 15 touchdowns right there.
Are you buying into the Dante Moore experiment if Oregon is truly going to be plug and play with Coach Lanning?
I do because I think there's something to be said about the patience. Not Dante's a five-star guy, and he was, he probably played a little too early at UCLA, and he's had a year to sit and watch behind Gabriel and watch that Oregon offense work. And in the limited sample that he played well. Good size, NFL body, and the talent's there. So I do trust that. It's not like by me saying Julian Sayin, I'm not saying I don't believe in Dante Moore. I think he's going to have a big year too.
Do you think with Dante Moore that they're going to have to adjust the offense a little bit with Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel both? You're looking at super precise timing, accuracy.
70%.
Yeah, I think the lowest
Yeah.
completion percentage over the last 3 years has been 72%, which is ridiculous. Like that's not, and again, we only have a smaller sample size a couple years ago with Dante Moore. That doesn't really seem to be in his wheelhouse in terms of how he plays. Are you concerned at all, or do you think at all that they're going to have to change things around a little bit to optimize his skill set?
I think they will either way. I mean, he doesn't run as much as
Nope.
Gabriel and Nix either.
And he's kind of slight.
He's real slight. Like not sure how many hits you want
Right.
him to take.
Right. So I don't know that they're going to take the extra. I don't have Dylan's rushing attempts in front of me, but Dylan ran less last year than he did at Oklahoma.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's true.
But the key to that whole RPO game is that threat, though. So that will be interesting to see if they still stay with it, because that's kind of how you get the balloon completion percentages.
Correct. And I think that's what I'm watching with Dante is I think his accuracy in that, but like you said, the RPO, the zero, that the chart I always look at in Pro Football Focus quarterbacks, and I've probably said it on here before, is all those guys can complete passes 0 to 9 yards, and certain quarterbacks are a little bit better on the deep ball, 20 plus, that 10 to 19 range that I always look at. Okay, who can actually pitch? Can you fit the windows in that intermediate passing game? And that'll be the key for Dante Moore. That was what it would do very well in that offense right away. So I think if Dante Moore can do that, Oregon, most preseason publications, they're the third wheel right now behind Ohio State and Penn State. And that feels about right for now. And they don't play Ohio State this year. So, I think Oregon's going to be right back in that Big Ten mix.
I'm curious about two guys that played last year at a power conference level that transferred into the Big Ten and who you like to fit better with. I'm going to give you Nico Yamaleva and Fernando Mendoza. Which one of those two is most appealing to you?
Well, I think Fernando steps into I like him, by the way, in general. He's tough. You saw him play at Cal. He plays with a lot of passion. You can tell he cares. He improved. and he goes to a place where they've played with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder with Kurt Signetti. Now, given the choice, I'll take Nico Iamaleava. And I think, here's why first impressions aren't always the worst thing. Remember Big Ten Media Day last year? Everybody was making fun of Deshaun Foster.
Yep, he missed
on his words a little bit.
Yeah, there's two. They're located in Los Angeles. Yeah, I remember.
Right. Yeah. So breakout, So at his breakout session, you got a few clues about who he really is. Like you could tell, players coach. Maybe he doesn't love being in front of the media as much. Who else didn't? Like Bill Belichick.
Yeah.
Okay. So not comparing the two, but I'm just saying UCLA finished 5-7 last year, and if you watched them, they competed. They lost to LSU. They lost to Penn State.
And they get a stud back at wide receiver.
Correct. And then I think Nico's one of the top third quarterbacks in the Big Ten. You could say he's probably top 5. So
interesting.
Long-winded way of saying I like Deshaun Foster. I like Nico. I don't know if they're Big Ten championship worthy, but I think they're going to be a tough out.
Interesting. So if I give you Aller, Altmaier, Mendoza, Raiola, Maeva, Nico, San, you still top 5 for Nico in the new conference. There's some fellas. I didn't even mention Moore.
Bryce Underwood, who we're like, we'll see what his talent is.
Yeah.
But I think Bryce is going to have a similar trajectory to Raiola last year, where there'll be flashes of, you'll be like, wow, that talent's amazing, but there'll be some ups and downs. And I think that was a fair way to look at Raiola last year, and he'll take that next step. Altmaier, you mentioned him as a 3-year starter, 10-win guy. And in that Illinois offense should be pretty good as well. Drew Aller, who he's the most polarizing quarterback probably in the Big Ten, depending on who you ask. You look at his numbers, you're like, wow. You see his leadership skills, great kid. He's just got, like everything else at Penn State, he's just got to go out and beat the Buckeyes. Once he does that, I think, everything will fall into place. There were articles about Drew Aller ahead of that Notre Dame game saying NFL scouts would like him as first rounder this year. And I was kind of, I don't know, so I'm on the fence with him. I could see it going either way for Drew Aller this year.
So here's the thing about Bryce, and I get your dab smack up there in that part. The thing, the reports so far, if you're kind of a tea leaf guy, haven't been glowing. Garcia comes in late in June. How much of it has to do with the relationship between Campbell, your OC, a young quarterback, and, Michigan outside the numbers? It would help to have some help in quarterbacks development, right? Either like guys to give the ball to or guys you're receiving instruction from. How much of the consternation, hand-wringing in Arbor has to do with those two unproven commodities?
I don't understand the lack of catching options at Michigan, and I always throw this stat out, and it's true. They have not had a first-round receiver since Braylon Edwards.
Yeah.
Which is wild. Now, some of that was they went to Rich Rod, and that offense is different. It's not like Jeremy Gallen wasn't good at Michigan. He had a good career.
And there's a guy in Pittsburgh I hope is pretty good that used to play at Michigan too, in Roman. So
yeah, Roman could play, right?
Yeah.
So Roman's good, but he wasn't first round good.
Yeah.
And
we're not counting Loveland.
Right. Like they've got the tight end. Yeah, true. They did have a first round tight end. But the receivers last year, I think their leading receiver had less than 300 yards. So yes, Bryce Underwood's going to need guys to throw to that aren't the tight end, and that'll be something to watch this year as we get into it. But I think the talent's there. I was talking to a source about him last Friday, and they said, great kid, great, makeup, and the thing he'll have to deal with, which every quarterback does, is, that's Michigan you're playing at, where the fans, man, there is no waiting period. Chad Henne didn't have that waiting period. He had to play well right away as a freshman. You are criticized and under a lot of scrutiny when you are the starting quarterback at Michigan.
How about how they drilled or grilled Drew Henson? Like the list is long.
Well, Tom Brady, right? Like they didn't want Tom Brady to start, so that he did okay after. But it is in place the way that they break down those quarterbacks, and you have the unenviable task as well of J.J. McCarthy lived up to those expectations when he was there. Last year, the quarterback play was not great. That's an understatement. It was not good. And they need Bryce to come in and play well right away. And that's why I compared him to Dylan, because you're seen perceived as this like program changing quarterback, but you have to understand it. I think with Dylan, we're going to see so much better this year. Matt Rhule was talking about it at Big Ten Media Day last year, where, yeah, as a freshman, you're going to make mistakes. And they want to live with those mistakes, and Michigan's going to have to live with theirs this year.
Yeah, we saw 3 seasons from Dylan last year and year one and a quarter with Holgerson should help immensely, because Holgerson's never not been good at this.
Right. And I think, again, who's catching the football? Are the interceptions? I think Coach Rhule said something about that last year that stuck with me, is like, you can look at a web page and it says 12 interceptions, but what were those 12 interceptions? Did somebody run what Matt can do is he'll say, yeah, the receiver didn't tuck the ball in, or he ran the wrong route, and they're looked at differently. But I do think they need to cut down turnovers as usual. And if Dylan can do that and continue to build on the moments that he had last year, where you watch him and you're like, man, that guy, yeah, that's a difference maker at quarterback. I think Nebraska could be one of those teams that ascends in the middle tier. We talk about it in Columbus all the time. I get asked about it. People here were so impressed with how Nebraska played Ohio State for 4 quarters last year. And that was a game right down to the end. And not many people do that in Ohio Stadium. I know Nebraska isn't more.
Remember, those guys were leaving and booing, and I was right that front row seat for that one. And
so, yeah, like I said, I know you guys don't do moral victories, but that just showed me that Matt Rhule's pushing it a little bit closer. If you can get a little bit closer, because Ohio State's the standard that everybody gets judged by in this conference.
For you, legit, not legit, or will you actually make the pick? Who's more on the hot seat, in your opinion, deservedly so, DeBoer or Kelly?
Oh, that's a great question. Because those are the two. I'll make a pick, but I'm going to take a second to. I would say Kalen's under more pressure, because it's just so hard to follow a guy like Nick Saban.
Is it deserved? Or is that a different conversation? Okay.
Well, kind of, because they lost to Vanderbilt.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
You can't do that. Right? Like, I'm trying to think.
Your delivery was hilarious.
Yes. Right. So I'd have to go back and look at Frank's first year after Tom Osborne, and like the comparison would be, and I know they didn't, but let's say Frank
9-3
first year would have lost to Kansas.
Yeah, or lost to Pitt or Maine,
Yeah, like somebody you're like, what? Like that Vanderbilt loss was eye-opening, and losing 4 games, and they're just not used to doing that. Now Kelly's a different kind of heat. It's the fit, it started with some like cringy moments, and then they lose 4 games last year. They don't like losing 4 games either. And they need to learn how to schedule an opener, because they're coming right out of the gate and playing Clemson at Clemson. So I do this stat all the time. They haven't won an opener since 2019. And you guys know this as college football fans. What do college football fans want to be more than anything else? They want to be 1-0.
Yep.
They want to win that first game when excitement for the season is so high. You've got to go get that one. And here they are going to Clemson and Death Valley. It's going to be brutal. So answer's still Kalen, but it's close.
Do you think there is legitimate heat on Brian Kelly this year, though? Like, I don't know. I sit here from the outside and I go, hey, hasn't really done
weird for a 2-time coach of the year, right?
Really, it seems like. Sorry, go ahead. Like I'll let you finish.
Go ahead. Finish your thought.
Well, I was just gonna say it seems like Marcus Freeman is an upgrade at Notre Dame, and that ever since Brian Kelly left Notre Dame, for the reasons that
he sure has debunked the recruiting myth.
For reasons that Marcus Freeman has really been like, yeah, that's actually not true here. It seems like Brian Kelly has struggled with quite a bit of options and weapons and everything in the cupboard he could ask for at LSU. Like, how real do you think it is that Brian Kelly probably needs to make the playoff this year?
Well, we put our playoff projections out last week, and we didn't do it on purpose, but I kind of smiled when I had it set up that way. I was like, hey, can you imagine if LSU goes to South Bend for the first round?
So is LSU in your preseason top 10, Bill?
11.
Okay.
Or 9 or 10. Yeah, they're there. And that's why, because they work the portal and he has a roster and he has a quarterback and he doesn't have a lot of excuses. So if you imagine a world where LSU goes like 9-3 or 10-2, which is possible, if they get that Clemson victory, they're going to be in good shape. Then they go and play Notre Dame in the first round. And then all of those things you said come to life. Marcus Freeman's relatable. That's the big thing with him. He made – we wrote this article a couple times last year. He made Notre Dame likable, which is very hard to do. He has fans. He has – we make the joke all the time. I said, the wives like him because he's an attractive guy. He's young, energetic. He's recruiting, like you said. He's recruiting like crazy. And I think Notre Dame's here to stay with him. So imagine if they get a swing at LSU, the build-up around that game will be fantastic.
Yeah, I'm still looking at the buyout numbers to see if he winds up in Pittsburgh if Tomlin doesn't win a first-round playoff game. I love both guys, so that would be something I would more than willingly swap over. But no sense in penciling in Freeman and Steeltown. I just do your work, Mike Tomlin.
Well, and the other one, like if you don't mind, they'll have him around here in Columbus. So, like, I'm not saying Ryan Day would ever leave, but when the Ryan Day pressure mounts, let's say, had Ryan Day and Ohio State lost to Tennessee last year, had that happened, there would have been a lot of people around Columbus saying, why can't we get Marcus Freeman? Which is the great irony that, Ryan Day just beat Marcus Freeman in the national championship game. But, I mean, he's well-liked in Ohio, but at the same time, at the title game last year, the pregame buildup, he was not dismissive because he's polite, but he was, he's like, I'm the coach at Notre Dame. I haven't been to I'm going to recruit Ohio, and I love my time at Ohio State, but he was very definitive about, like, I'm the coach at Notre Dame. This is where I'm at.
So, Bill, I wonder if you get the sense, because I get that Ryan Day just beat Marcus Freeman. I get that they just won a national championship. Like, is it crazy that there's probably some Ohio State fans that would still take Marcus Freeman over Ryan Day?
I had to explain to my editor, he's a Vandy grad. So this is the second time I've talked about Vandy on this segment. But when I would tell him all year, and I've grown up here, lived here my whole life, or most of my life, and I said, there's a large population of Buckeye fans that would rather beat Michigan than win the national title.
Yeah.
And he's like, you're crazy, you're this, you're that. And just that couple weeks in between, I was like, he calls me one night. He says, hey, I was out at a tennis, he plays tennis. He said, I was playing tennis last night, and this guy with the Ohio State hat was talking to him, and he said, and I asked him your question. He said, yeah, I beat Michigan, no question. Like, he goes, I'm starting to believe. I was like, I know it's different here because that rivalry is different than everything else. I know people have rivalries. I get it. But in Columbus, that's the priority. Now, that said, it did win a national title, and it did feel great. And I think it took a lot of pressure off of Ryan Day going into the season. But can you guys imagine if they go 11-0, and then they go right back up to Ann Arbor, and they lose? And then that's 5 in a row, and that hasn't happened since I'd like the 20s. So, I mean, that would be one. That's one that Ohio State has to have this year.
Talking with the great Bill Bender, all things college football. Bill, let me ask you something. I try to ask our smart national guys the perception of the ACC and on the heels of the AQs and who gets in and, the different formulas. I did a little unscientific poll a couple months ago about Clemson, Florida State, and Miami. Could they all be good at the same time? Could that be 3 AQs? And history says I'm wrong, that they can't all be good at the same time. So if there's going to be a new kid on the block and you got to buy some stock, you go into the Dallas-Fort Worth area and Rhett Lashley and SMU, or you go into Chapel Hill with Belichick in North Carolina?
I'll probably go to SMU because I think that market and that new space, and you have a good coach. Red did a good job with those guys last year, and they used the portal effectively. I mean, they had guys on the defensive line that could play, and they have fun offense. Now, North Carolina, it's an experiment. They should be. They've always been. Ryan McGee wrote about that last year. It's just that always kind of 8-5, 9-4, 7-6 type program, and they haven't had the coach push them to the next level. Mac got them close. Mac had 2 NFL quarterbacks there, and Sam Howell and Drake May. So, I would probably go SMU, though. I think they could be an every year in the mix type program. You bringing up an interesting point about, I was asked, like, how is it that Florida State, and Miami, like, 2 of those 3 should be superpowers? But what happened is Alabama, Georgia, and Clemson have pulled so many recruits from that state that, that's, Alabama, Georgia is kind of like what Miami, Florida State used to be. A couple of weeks ago, we did that top 25 rivalries in college football, and people like me that grew up in the 90s are like, I just kept staring at it. I'm like, I really have Miami and Florida State number 17, really? That used to be like number 2, number 1 in some cases.
Did you have Florida State on there at all?
Yeah, it was in the teams as well.
Okay.
So you're like, these were must-see events, and now they're just, I always tell the story. I said, it was either last year or the year before that. It was a college football Saturday, and I'm flipping through the games, and my routine as usual, I went across whatever channel, and I said, oh, Miami, Florida State's on today. That wouldn't have been the case when I was 17. It would have been, I was like literally in Ohio, the game, we had our practice or Saturday practice in the morning, and then it was, we're going to a buddy's house. We all crowded in a basement and watched Florida State, Miami, because you were kind of watching an NFL game at the time.
Well, let me ask you something here, Bill. Which one are you more comfortable kind of predicting from a success standpoint? You going to take Arch Manning's development with Sarkisian, or kind of the trio of Stockton, Bobo, and Kirby in Athens?
I like Arch. I think Sark, and I talked to Peyton Manning about this a couple weeks ago. He talked to us about his show on the History Channel, and then I snuck in some Arch questions. And I think the point resonated that he has the same coordinator, same coach as he had all 3 years. And that helped with his development. Now, and I do think that matters. I thought Gunnar Stockton played well in the bowl game, and with experience, he'll be fine. But who's catching the ball there? That was a huge problem for them.
Yeah, the case of the old dropsies.
They did, and that didn't help Carson Beck. And then, for Arch, I know they got Wingo. I know they've got pass-catching options. They lost some to the draft, no doubt. But I think he'll do well there. And, the appetite for Arch is obviously really high. And I think it's almost impossible to deliver at that point. But I think if he plays 2 seasons at Texas, which is the rumor, that you'll get even more in the second year. And the Mannings have shown time and again, that is a patient family. They will let the process play out. They're not in a hurry.
We're talking with Bill Bender here from the Sporting News. Bill, we've been talking a lot about offensive coordinators and quarterback and how that combination we think will have an outsized importance on the way the college football season plays out, considering how much volatility it appears there might be here. Obviously, Arch and Sark get consideration there, more on the prowess of Sark at this point and the potential of Arch. But is there a quarterback coordinator, or we'll call it play caller, because obviously some of the head coaches call them, is there a combination that you're particularly either enamored with or intrigued by this season?
Well, I mean, like we talked about Arch and Sark, that'll be a lot of fun. I just think the continued development of Cade Klubnik at Clemson, it sneaks up on you that he had 36 touchdowns and 6 interceptions last season. Really good year. And now, can he put it together against some SEC schools? Struggled a little bit against South Carolina and Georgia, obviously. Now, a lot of guys do, but I mean, those are the games that are for the perception of him. I read a headline the other day that, probably a little misleading. It said something to the effect of Cade Klubnik was a generational quarterback. I wouldn't go that far. I just think he's a 3-year starter with a ton of experience. With Garrett Riley, got comfortable last year. Before that Louisville game, they were humming. They were scoring a ton of points. And I do think Clemson's pretty loaded this year. So he's probably the one that, can he be that? We talked about it earlier, is he that Heisman guy? Can he be that guy that kind of pushes to the forefront there? And it's certainly possible.
They're mock drafts. I mean, they got to have 4 or 5 guys in the first 2 rounds. I mean, that's a fantastic roster right now for Clemson. So 2 more for me, Bill, and we'll get you out of here. For all the talent, you speak about quarterback development and, quarterback talent prowess. Dillingham and Leavitt, they're not flying under the radar, but for as good as they were a year ago, and for bringing 17 guys back, why aren't they more the consensus choice in what appears to be a very wide open Big 12, even with the Retzloff news?
Yeah, I love it. Well, Cam's gone. So, can he do it without that reliable workhorse behind him? I think they'll be fine there. He has Jordan Tyson back. Sam Leavitt's fun. He's fun to watch. He's mobile. He's got really good escapability. Throws the ball well. Took us all by surprise last year. And Kenny Dillingham, much like you got to trust him like you do Dan Lanning. And I think if that continues, they'll be very good. The thing with the Big 12, though, is there are other quarterbacks I like a lot.
It's the deepest quarterback conference. Maybe not at the top, but it's the deepest quarterback conference, in my opinion.
Correct, because all of those guys can play. Like Josh Hoover had a big year. Sawyer Robertson had a big year.
That's my dark horse.
Like he really closed the season strong. Avery Johnson is a dual threat quarterback. He can play. Jalen Daniels is still around. Rocco Beck, those guys have been there for a while. So yeah, the quarterback play will go a long way in determining who wins that Big 12. And I think it's the most exciting conference because of that parity and that unknown factor. That really, they capitalized on that last year. And granted, they had Shedeur and Travis Hunter in Colorado on top of it, but that to continue this year, no doubt.
I think I could see whatever the math guy. It's math adjacent, so I'm gonna obviously struggle, but the top 10 could fluctuate mightily in the first 4 or 5 weeks of college football. I'd wait on the rankings. But having said that, is this the most unsure you've been at the top since when, if in fact you're pretty unsure?
Yeah. No. I think the top 7, State, Texas, Georgia, Clemson, Notre Dame,
Penn State.
The Penn State, obviously. And that top 6 or 7, pretty good. Now, a lot of them have new quarterbacks, which adds to the mix. But, you learn to trust. I think a lot – I'll put it to you this way. I'd be stunned if 50% of the playoff isn't the same, at least. 50% of the playoff teams aren't the same. And that's the Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Georgia, Texas type. And every year Notre Dame gets in, they take one from somebody else.
Who wins the Big 12?
I picked Arizona State, so I'm going to ride with that. And I'm with you. I mean, because of that Leavitt combination, I like their schedule, and I think they will put together another good season there. And it's close though. You could pick a BYU, you could pick Kansas State, Iowa State. That Kansas State Iowa State game will go a long way in determining.
Texas Tech and Baylor are going to be a problem for somebody. They're going to be a thorn in the side of some of these favorites. Baylor may have the best quarterback wide receiver combo that no one talks about down there in Waco.
Right, and I think the way that Sawyer Robertson closed the season, you got to look at him and definitely that they're going to be in the mix. And what an opener they have against Auburn. So yeah, it can only get here fast enough.
That's our guy, Bill Bender, Sporting News. We appreciate the time as always, Bill. I'm sure we will talk again over the coming weeks and months as this football season gets underway. We appreciate the time as always.
Always appreciate you, B2. Thank you, buddy.
Hey, enjoy Media Day. I'll see you guys soon. Thanks so much.
You got it.